Hello. Well, this is now the 9th video in my series on the history of Halloween Horror Nights 20 Years of Fear. I still have a little time to continue making videos today, and so I'm going to keep buggering on. Yes. Also interesting, the darker it gets out there, the more you can see me in here. Isn't physics amazing? Alright, I was talking in the previous video about the 7th house of the year, Catacombs, Black Death Rising. Yes. And I talked a bit about plague doctors, and I decided to bring a visual aid. Isn't he adorable? Now this isn't exactly what they look like. This is a plague doctor. This is what plague doctors look like, but this isn't the one from the event. The ones in the event had more, I think, pointy hats on top, and the mask had, oh, you can actually see this is a mask covering his face. Stop making noise. But you see, there were big goggles, like steampunk goggles on it. They don't think they had the little ruff there, or the wand, but anyway, the idea, this was actually purchased in Venice, Italy. I bought it there on a trip. I won to Italy. I won a trip in the year 2011, actually. Right, spinning a wheel of fortune, and won a trip to Italy. Isn't that interesting? It was right about the time Lady Luck was revealed, with her own wheel of fortune. And I always thought that Lady Luck made that happen for me, and I won a grand prize, you know. But at any rate, quite nifty thing. And as I said, they looked a little more imposing and scary with their black gloves, and they would come out and snatch at you. There were also some plague victims that were sort of zombie-like corpse things, and one dressed like a priest with a little hat and would come out of the grave and lurch forward. And it was quite creepy and macabre. It was a rather evocative little house. Now, a phenomena occurred because a fellow named Andrew, we always called him Andrew Shrimp, I believe, he made a little Photoshop joke. It was cats and combs, and posted that on Horror Night Nightmares, just like he did with some of the other silly things he came up with, like one of the scare zones became straws and cream. We'll get to that later. But cats and combs. And so I was inspired whilst I was there, and I went to what used to be the Twister Aftermath gift shop. Now, of course, there's nothing there at all. They've totally ravaged that building. It's all empty inside. They're turning it into a Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show attraction. But there used to be the Twister, and of course the little gift shop you hit when you come out. And they used to sell all sorts of little funny animals there. And I bought a cat. This cat. Well, actually, this is the third cat I bought there, at the very same design. And a comb, not this one there. The comb I bought was a more ornate orange comb, bright orange with little jewel bedazzle things on it and things. I don't know where it is at the moment. It's here somewhere. I just can't find it. So I picked this one up instead because it's about the same size and shape. And buying these objects on site, I had them on me in my pockets. And when I went through, because I'm a cargo pockets, the house, I took the little kitty and the little comb out, and I would start combing the cat as I went through the house, making a visual pun. Cats and combs. And people got it. And you see, occasionally you'd see a plague doctor look at me with his beak, and then suddenly you'd see this. They're all supposed to be doing this, by the way, because they all have the plague. So occasionally they're coughing. Once there's someone doing coughing, but without actually coughing, you see his head doing this, and I go, he's laughing inside there, ha ha ha. But then it became a sort of game, and they started getting into it. And sometimes the plague doctors would grab your kitty, and sometimes they'd play with it, and then or pet it. and reach out and pet the kitty. Or sometimes they would take it away and then come back and give it to you again on the way out. And then one time, the kitty never came back. And one time, someone stole my kitty at Finnegan's when I was drinking. It was no longer in my pocket. How that happened, I don't know. So I ended up, this is the third one I still have. Meow. I called him Bobette, in honor of Bob, who's over there on the daybed. Bobette, because it's French, Catacombs, after all. So that's, I thought was a good name for it. So, and this caught on, and other people began to take cats and combs through there, and some of the people in charge apparently didn't like it, but eventually they realized it was harmless, and it became a thing. So, I thought that was amusing. One person claims that's the only reason it didn't get to be House of the Year, but I have, I can disprove that with logic, because we're getting now to the 8th house of the event, the last house. Havoc Dogs of War. Remember that quote from Julius Caesar, and it was in the other Sprung Tent 2, the one you have to go around Men in Black to get into. And the idea behind this house is that at this military installation called Shadow Creek. Now that's interesting. Shadow Creek, Shady Brook. Sounds like a pattern. But in Shadow Creek, wherever it was located, somewhere on the East Coast, there was this great big bunker, and inside this bunker they were doing scientific experiments on soldiers to create super soldiers. Oh, it's just like Captain America. And they took Steve Rogers and gave him those injections and made him into yes, the handsome hero on the big white horse, yes. But in this case, whatever experiments they did affected the minds of the soldiers. They may become more physically powerful and be able to endure pain and just keep coming as if they had an incredible rush of adrenaline at all times, and then also rage that cannot be stopped, and kill, kill, kill. That's what you want the soldier to do. But unfortunately, you can't control the soldier, and they aren't interested in just taking out the enemy. They'll take out everybody. They become unstoppable killing machines. What the fuck do you do then? Well, you have to either kill off your dogs of war, or, put them down, or lock them up, or hope they don't get loose. I don't know, but that's the problem, because they can't be repressed, those little doggies, because they're agile, mobile, hostile. Ooh-rah! Ooh! Yes, that's the sort they are. That's the sort of, like Royal Commandos or Israeli paratroopers or Marine Corps Recon or para-rescuemen, except not the life-saving mission, but more the life-taking mission. But the hardcore OWar types, who deserve to wear berets and jump boots, those kinds of people. Awesome, badass people in various military forces that we all admire so much. At least I do. And we have these sorts of people, except they've been taken to an extreme now. They've gone way beyond that. Now they're dangerous, psychotic creatures. It's kind of sad, really, what they've done to them. But at the same time, OMG, the cast who played both A and B cast, I don't know if they went to boot camp, if they went to survival training, went out in the woods and ate squirrels. I don't know what they did. If they jumped off of buildings or out of perfectly good airplanes, whatever the hell they did, they were fired up just like troops really are. And they all shaved their head down to the skin, including the women. And they're all supposed to have on the back of their necks a UPC symbol. That's how you know they're a dog of war. Those beep things you scan, like they scan if you're a checker in a supermarket. Little beep laser things. So they've got that on the back of necks. Some of them actually got them tattooed on their necks. Didn't just get the little makeup. They actually had them put on for real. Holy crap. And they put these, And these guys were, they were out of their freaking minds. And they were into their roles so amazingly. And what's interesting is that the house itself wouldn't have been anything special otherwise. It's the same exact pattern you saw last year. The same floor plan you had for the two previous houses. A dead exposure and what was the one in the Sculders one, what's it called, the spawning. And it is exact same floor plan, except the very entrance. You don't go through the office, you go through a sort of medical laboratory room, but then after that every single turn is exact. You have this here, you have that over there, you have a window there, you have a corridor, this turn. If you could remember going through the two previous houses, you know exactly what was coming. You have the room with the 3 metal tubes. You have the room with the long hallway, and there's that thing on the side that moves back and forth. You've got the ceiling, you've got the floor, you've got everything exactly like it was in that last room where you go around, all the way around in the corner, come back again to the exit. Every single thing was identical, from the zombies to the Sculders to the Dogs of War, except, of course, it was decorated differently. It was all black light and strobes for dead exposure, and for the Sculders it was all dripping and green and mossy and, you know, underwater sewers, but the same exact structures. Here it was all more high-tech and, you know, more black and chrome and that kind of thing, but it was still basically the same pattern, the same house redone, redressed to fit the different theme. And so the structure of the house was, you know, a little bit, you know, familiar. But the characters, that changed everything. Those scare actors were brilliant. They were on fire, and they leaped out at you, and they were completely and utterly convincing as those incredible, insane guys. They were all young, active, hot, wild people, and they were incredible at it, and they were totally into their characters and willing to take that extra step. Now, Catacombs inspired me because you have Catacombs, and right next door are dogs. So I started bringing in a dog. And I had him in my other cargo pocket. When I went through that Havoc, I brought out the little dog. Immediately, the Dogs of War grabbed that dog. They threw that dog. They threw him up in the air. They got him, and they did this. They barked at it. And they threw it to each other. And, you know, it was hysterical. There's one guy named Marcus, I think, Mr. Timeout. He was inside this metal tube, and he would take the dog in his mouth through a little tiny opening, and he would play with it. It was just remarkable. Fun. And they were totally into it. And so, near the end of the event, but not quite yet, I made a prediction. I said, I bet you they're going to get House of the Year. That's such a wild cast. They're so totally enthusiastic. There's not one member of that team on A or B who isn't giving 150% every night. I can't say that about every other cast and every other house. I love all the other houses, but this one, even though it's so minimal, and there's no special effects, there's no floating ghosts, there's no magic things, no fire, no bizarre supernatural, no projections, nothing moving, no mechanical devices, none of that, no special costumes, just wearing tank tops, shaved heads, and lots of leather straps and things, and guns, bang, 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 and all that stuff, you know, their combat boots, whatever. They're so totally into this. They're so completely absorbed into it. They're so bang, 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 spot on every fucking time. I bet you they're going to win because they're just the best cast I've seen here. So I gave my little doggy a doggy tag. You could make them out on the city walk. It's a doggy tag. I don't know if you can read what it says. I'll hold it up to you. And this is before. This was about a week before they announced House of the Year. Okay? And if you can read it, it says on there, it reads, Dog of War, Havoc, HHN 20, HOTY, House of the Year, Pound Puppy. And I put all that on there, and I showed some of the, and I saw some of the dogs that were on were from one of the houses that either it was a night they had off, or they were on the shift that started the second, the second one, not the first shift, but the second shift. So they didn't start right away, and so they were in the park before they started their shift. Whatever it was, I showed them this, and they looked at that and said, "Have you heard something?" Because they thought that somehow I heard from some inside source that they had won. And I said, no, that's just me. I haven't heard a thing. I don't think they've even decided yet. But that's my prediction. And a couple of weeks later, when they gave House of the Year, it was Havoc Dogs OWar. So I accurately predicted. Now, I'm not saying I'm so good I can accurately pick the House of the Year every time. Most of the time, I might be a little off. In fact, I didn't get it last year or the year before. But that year, I got it. That year I got it. I knew that was the house. It had to be, because those guys were insane. One of the best. There's certain casts that when you see them, you know. Last year, I could have predicted Street of the Year. The Chainsaw Clowns. That was the same sort of cast. Completely, utterly insane. Totally into it. Giving 110% every night. That's what Havoc was like the Chainsaw Clowns were last year. So just that's what my take on that was. So that was Havoc Dogs OWar. So I was very, very, very proud of the puppies when they did win it, and very glad that I had predicted it accurately. Okay, now zones, scare zones. Let's go on to the scare zones. There were 6 official scare zones at Halloween Horror Nights 20 Years of Fear, beginning with the one you see as you enter the park, and you go down the middle, what they call the Production Central, or Avenue of the Stars, whatever you want to call it, Plaza of the Stars. And that was one of the first really Latin-themed things they did at Halloween Horror Nights, based on the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, which is actually November 1st, rather than Halloween night, but still, nevertheless, you might call it Mexican Halloween, but it actually goes back to ancient Aztec traditions. It's kind of interesting that there are parallels in different cultures, but then when you think about the equinoxes and the solstices, it makes sense that there are certain times a year that are about renewal and birth, and certain times a year that are about harvest and when you start thinking about death and the afterlife. It's just so, 6 months in between the summer solstice and, not 6 months, but halfway, because they're divided in, in quarters. So halfway between the summer solstice and the winter solstice, right? No, that's not right. It's halfway between the equinox, the autumnal equinox in September, and the winter solstice in December. So after the day and night were equal in the autumn, and before you get to that day in midwinter when all of a sudden it's the longest night of the year. Somewhere in between that, right on the cusp then, between those two periods, those two extremes, you have a day around November 1st, October 31st, and that's Halloween. And you find in many ancient traditions, besides, the Romans had a day of that time, the Celts had their day, which became Samhain, which became Halloween. We also find that in North America, Native Americans celebrated a festival, and again, this is the northern hemisphere, because this sort of thing would have been reversed, the calendar, to the other side of the calendar if you're down below, in the southern hemisphere. But in the northern hemisphere, they know. And so that's why this parallel exists. So there's a similar holiday about the dead because some things are archetypal, you see, in Mexico, with the civilization. Why there? Because that is the part of North America where you had civilized natives. And by civilized, I don't mean that one was primitive and the other. What I mean is the others were nomadic. They moved around. They didn't rely on agriculture so much. They grew corn, but not as much. In Mexico and the Aztecs, they stayed in one spot and they grew corn. Therefore, it was more important. They grew crops. the whole cycle of the seasons was more important to them for that reason. And the ideas of harvest and reaping and death and resurrection was part of, just like it was in the other part of the world. You see, that's how these archetypes work. So they have their own Day of the Dead. And so there is a festivity of that time, celebrating the dead. And it's not a scary thing. The dead are your family, they're your friends, they're back, so they're going to have a party with you. And so you have this wild party, and you go to the cemetery, and you decorate it, and you get drunk out there with the dead people, and you celebrate by making bread, and candy, and cakes, and goodies in the shapes of skeletons. You make dolls in the shape of skeletons. They're doing the same thing they did when they were alive. They're having a good time. They're drinking, they're dancing, they're partying, they're dressed up. They're having a good time. That's what the Day of the Dead is like. It's a very festive occasion. And the scare zone was themed to that, but in a little more darker, macabre way. You had Esqueleto Muerta. How do I say that correctly? I'm not good at Spanish. That would be more like Esqueleto Muerta. Means literally dead skeleton, which is a really redundant thing. I mean, how do you have a live skeleton? Unless it's inside of a person, it's not alive. You know, any skeleton is usually dead if it's not inside of a person anymore. And these were moving around like they were alive, so are they dead? Shouldn't it be a skeleton vivo? Because they're dancing around and having a good time? I don't know. But anyway, you're out there, and you have these skeletons, just like a Wild Day of the Dead celebration, and women dressed with the skull faces and everyone dancing around, and it's all neon. It's all neon, with all kinds of colors, and orange and purple and green and all of the neon paint, fluorescent paint, with all the black light shining on it. So it's all glowing everywhere. And it's really less of a scary scare zone and more of a party scare zone. Although they do have some good scares where people come jumping out at you from underneath in dark robes, and then they pull them back and there's the glowing part. Or they have these big coffins set up and somebody might come out of the coffin at you. So if you're not expecting that sort of thing. And of course fog is involved. Even when you're glowing in the dark, you know, a little bit of fog can hide you. So, but it was more of a happy, bouncy thing, a party place, and less of a really frightening scare zone. But it was very pretty and very delightful, and for other reasons, and festive. And there are 5 more scare zones, and I really have come to the end of part 9. So part 10 I shall resume with the next scare zone.